Hello, how are you doing? And welcome back to the channel. Should Steve Borthwick stick or twist in terms of team selection for England's game against Ireland in Dublin this weekend? That's what I'm talking about in this video. I've named the 23 that I think I would name. As always, when I do these videos, I actually think selection is a really tough thing to agree upon. I don't know whether Borthwick should give the players that were humiliated at Twickenham against France an opportunity to respond and to prove themselves, or whether drastic changes are needed. So I've named my team, but do let me know what you think in the comments down below. What would you like to see Steve Borthwick do when it comes to England selection this weekend? Subscribe to the channel and like the video as well. Would always really appreciate that. And all right, let's get into it. Whenever I do a video about selection, I am struck by the fact that I'm able to sit at home and just pick a team. It's almost playing fantasy rugby, isn't it, really? You don't necessarily have to think about the matchups and the in-detail stuff that all those England coaches will be. I don't think selection is easy, and I actually really don't think selection is easy when you've been beaten as comprehensively as England have done, even though many people would think it would, because do you want to give those players another opportunity? There will be a fire in the bellies of those players who were completely dismantled by a brilliant France, or because of the nature of that defeat, does it require changes? What I've gone from here is actually quite a lot of changes. Some of them I'm not too sure about, I'll explain as I go, but overall I think England need to shuffle their pack for the game against Ireland this weekend. So I'll put it up on screen now, but this is the team that I would select if I was Steve Borthwick. It's Ellis Genge, Jamie George and Kyle Sinclair in the front row. I've got Johnny Hill and Ollie Chessum in the second row. I've got Ben Curry, Jack Willis and Lewis Ludlam my back row. Alex Mitchell and Owen Farrell the halfbacks, with Guy Porter and Manu Tuolangi in the centres. Henry Arundel on one wing, Max Malins on the other, and Freddie Stewart at fullback. As for my bench, I've gone for Jack Walker, Bevan Rodd and Will Collier, Mauro Itoje and Ben Earl, Jack Van Portfleet, Marcus Smith and Caden Murley in there as well. So first of all, this is based upon the training squad that England had from the start of this week. I'd imagine it might get trimmed down at some point, possibly later today, maybe even by the time you've watched this video. Some of those players won't be available, but they have been training with England this week, and those are the ones I would go with. So I'm going to run through it and explain my selections. First of all, the front row, it's unchanged. Even though I've made a number of changes in the team, the front row is unchanged. Why? Because actually I think it's a real issue for England at the moment. I don't think there is the strength and depth there. I think that's been a reflection on England's bench throughout the Six Nations, with Jack Walker, Mako Vunipola and Dan Cole being the replacements. So I do think at this moment in time, Genge, George and Sinclair is our best front row, but I do think it's an issue that there's not more of a competition for places there. I have changed the props on the bench though. Bevan Rodd and Will Collier, both part of England's training squad. I've put them as the prop replacements. I don't think either of them will play. I'd imagine it'll be Dan Cole and Mako again. And I've stuck with Jack Walker on the bench just because, with the greatest respect to him and Tom Dunn, again, I just don't think England's options at the moment in terms of replacement hookers, I'm not too enamoured by either of those. So unchanged front row, but let's get into the second row because this is where things start getting interesting. I've moved Mauro Itoje to the bench because I don't think we've seen the best of Mauro for a little while now. I think Ollie Chessum has been pretty good this Six Nations. I've brought Johnny Hill back in. I was thinking whether it be a Dave Ribbons or a Nick Asikwe or someone like that. I went with Johnny Hill in the end, even though he hasn't he's been playing for Sale a lot throughout this Six Nations. I don't think he's particularly high on the shortlist at the moment, but just because he does have more international experience than some of those other guys, if I'm replacing Mauro and having Mauro come off the bench, I still wanted some international experience there coming up against a really, really good Ireland pack. So that's the reason I've gone for Johnny Hill. He's replacing Mauro Itoje, and Itoje drops to the bench. It's also worth saying on Mauro as well, he's had this underlying health issue, which he's kind of spoken about, but without obviously, which is completely fine, revealing exactly what it is. That has been going on for him in the background as well. So depending on what that is, we don't know how much that may have affected his form and his performances. We hope he's okay. I still think he can get back to his best. In fact, there were moments against France where you could kind of sense him starting to be that real pest around the ruck that we used to be all the time. But hopefully he can get back there. He's on the bench. Chessum and Johnny Hill, the second row. In my back row, it's Alex Dombrandt that misses out. I mean, I know a lot of people have been critical of Dombrandt. I think he did struggle against France. I actually thought he had a good game against Wales the week before. So it's kind of the nature of international rugby and how fickle we can all be. But I think we saw him got completely out-muscled, completely outclassed against that French back row. So I've moved Ludlam to 8. Ludlam, I know, didn't have the best game either. But overall, this Six Nations, I think he does he has played well in most of those other games. So I've moved Ludlam to 8, where he often plays for Northampton. And then I've got Ben Curry at 6 and Jack Willis at 7. Wasn't easy there. I've gone for Ben Earl on the bench. I was tempted by Ben Earl. I just thought maybe Ben Curry gave that little bit more physicality to try and stand up to what is a brilliant Irish pack at this moment in time. But I could understand the calls if you wanted Ben Earl in there instead. So that's my pack. Couple of changes in there. Few more changes in the back line, which I will acknowledge myself is quite harsh, because the reason the backs didn't function against France wasn't necessarily their fault. England were completely on the back foot at the breakdown in the physicality. They didn't have any sort of ball really to play with. So in a sense, I could understand why some people might watch this and say, you need to make more replacements in the forwards. But I just didn't know where else other than those changes that I have made. So 9 and 10, I've changed both of them. Jack Van Poortvliet, I really like as a young England international. You should forget he's only in his early 20s and he's had some pretty tough outings now. If you think back to the autumn when he played against New Zealand, you think to a number of other games. He was so impressive against Australia in the summer when he made his debut. He then came off the bench against Argentina and immediately had an impact. Since then, I think he has struggled a little bit. He's a young kid. He will still be good. But for the time being, I've dropped him to my bench. And Alex Mitchell, who immediately made an impact against France, the zip and pace he brought to that back line as soon as he came on, incredibly experienced in terms of his club rugby as well. I think Mitchell is the best option at this moment in time for England at 9. I know a lot of people might say Harry Randall, who's been really impressive for a Bristol side, who've all of a sudden found some form in the Gallagher Premiership. Don't you worry, I'll be touching back on that at some point, probably once the Six Nations ends. As a Bristol fan, where's that come from? I did not see it coming, but I just wouldn't bring Harry Randall back in at this point, right at the end of the Six Nations. I'd probably hope to see him continue to do it for Bristol a little bit more regularly, and then maybe look towards him possibly if you're looking towards the World Cup, but towards the back end of the season. So Mitchell 9, JVP on the bench. Owen Farrell at fly half. Now, not for a moment do I think that England's performance against France was down to Marcus Smith. It was a whole team issue. In fact, the debate around the fly half generally is probably a little bit overblown. England do have 3 really good options. I personally can't go for George Ford just because he doesn't have enough club rugby under his belt for me. So I'm going with Owen Farrell because I think the game plan that England will employ against Ireland will be best suited to Farrell at 10 rather than Smith. I still think there is a future for Smith, and I know people get really frustrated, and there will be plenty of people in the comments saying it has to be Smith over Farrell. For me, I think Owen Farrell is an utterly brilliant rugby player. I think he's still a really good option for England at 10, particularly coming up against this Irish side. So I've gone Farrell at 10. Centres are changed as well. One of those, Ollie Lawrence, is injured. He's dropped out, so he's not available. Otherwise, he'd obviously be there. So I've gone for Guy Porter at 12 and Manu Tuolangi at 13. So Lawrence dropping out through injury and then Henry Slade dropping out as well. I don't know where I stand on Henry Slade. I think he's a really excellent rugby player. We've seen him be incredibly good for Exeter Chiefs. He's got over 50 England caps. But I think the amount of internationals, despite all the games he's played, that you could really say that was where Henry Slade stood up and dictated the game or looked like a superb international, are actually kind of few and far between. I still think there could possibly be a position for him in an England side going forward just because of his skill set, because how he's a bit of a rangy runner, he's a distributor and he can kick as well. But I'm just not sure at this moment in time. So I wanted Guy Porter to come in at 12 because that's where he's been playing for Leicester this season. And I think you need power in that centres. I think you need Manu Tuolangi. He'll be chomping at the bit. He'll be frustrated this Six Nations to have got more of a run in the team. He'd have seen Ollie Lawrence come in and establish himself as that 12, as that power centre. I want Manu Tuolangi at 13. I think you need him in those centres for this game against Ireland. I'll finish up with my back 3 with Henry Arundel, Max Malins and Freddie Stewart. I was really tempted to name Caden Murley. I've got Murley on the bench. I was tempted to replace him with Malins, but again, I just came back to the fact that I thought it was maybe a little bit harsh on Malins because the wingers weren't really to blame for what we saw against France. I want Arundel because he's so explosive. He gives England a different dynamic in that back 3. I've stuck with Malins and Stewart, and then Murley perhaps coming off the bench. I also think in terms of the defensive or the dealing with kicks for the back 3 is going to be pretty key in this game for England. So I like Malins and Stewart in terms of the options there, but I've got Caden Murley on the bench along with Marcus Smith, his Harlequins teammate. So that is my England 23 to take on Ireland. As I said at the top of the video, I think it's so difficult to decide who to select for this game. Maybe I need more changes in the forwards. Maybe I'm being harsh on a few of the backs, but that's kind of what I drew up. It's a ballsy call. I don't think Borthwick will go for it at all, but that's what I would do. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Like the video and subscribe to the channel as well. Would really appreciate that. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.